Welcome, everybody. We're going to be working on Unit 4 here tonight. In Unit 4, we're going to start talking about using some no-code tools for data exploration. But we need to talk about what data exploration is first. The software we're going to be working with tonight is probably one of the most important uh, pieces of software in the data science world. It's a product called Tableau. And I have talked with the Tableau academic people and have set it up so that we can get free licenses for the summer for the full-blown version of the product. I know that the PowerPoint, if you guys read it already, has us using the public or free version, which is cool, but it's very limited. And it's not what pros use, by the way. So we have a full-blown license key for the summer. It's only valid for the summer. And then if we need this product again for a different class, I will provide you with a different license key. I had a little apprehension as to whether the license key would get here in time because I asked for it about a week or so ago. And it just came through this morning. I'm like, perfect, just in time for class. Apparently they were away for the holiday or whatever, but it takes a few days to get the keys. I'm just putting that up front. But this is our agenda for the night. And the introduction will include, like I said, installing Tableau and hopefully getting to working with some of the data. Now, you heard me say this before. I said this in the database class earlier. I say it like anytime I'm dealing with data, but understanding your data is really important before you start analyzing it, right? If you're going to train like models and you don't understand what your data is, you're going to have some issues. So one of the first things you do when you're working with data to drive anything is to look at it, right? What's in that file? What kind of data are we dealing with? Is it text? Is it numbers? Is it Boolean? What is it? You know? Um, and it's not really that we're necessarily worried about like every particular detail of the information, but we're looking at, once again, that high level view of everything that's really important to kind of figuring things out. And it is an essential first step. We can use a lot of different ways to do this. Some of the more primitive ways, take that data and just open up the file, in a text editor, in a spreadsheet, or whatever. What you will find ultimately is a tool like Tableau or Power BI, which is it's very similar, allow you to bring data in and look at it and play with it in really powerful ways. And more importantly, without polluting the data and having the capability also to have a live data feed. So if the data changes, you're seeing an updated version of it. Going through this whole thing really kind of helps us when we start to build more advanced solutions, because if we know our data, then our models are better too, ultimately. So why do we need to do this? All right. One of the things that we do with data is we take it and we turn it into graphics. Why do we do that? Because I can give you a formula, I can give you data points on a chart, a graph, or whatever. But when I look at hard-coded numbers, I don't really extract a lot of meaning from it. Right? I'll look at this whole sea of like ones and zeros, or look at, what does this number mean? We don't know. But if we turn it into a graphic, we can see how the numbers relate. So visuals are really, really helpful. So a human can look at a visual of information and very quickly go, oh, this one's bigger, or that one's higher, or that one's lower, or that one's, there's a whole lot of these, you can see it. And that visual is really, really important. And so why do we create visuals for information? Because usually it's easier to understand it for humans, and it's easier to communicate it to others. That's really important too, right? We understand it better, easier to communicate it to others, right? There's a thing in data that we often talk about and forget about, this thing called metadata, right? If you guys ever hear that term. So what is data? Data is information. Metadata is data about the data is basically what it is. So like when we look at like a file, for example, files often have what they call metadata attached to them. A lot of people don't even know this. Like you look at an image, like this image we have on the screen right now, whoever took that image, there's, aside from the actual or pixels that make that image appear on my screen, attached to that image file is also information about what file format it is, what dimensions the image is, what format it's in, and if you take it with like most modern cameras, it'll also embed information about like, what camera model took it, what the settings were on the camera, like the f-stops and the aperture settings. No kidding. And if you do it with your phone and you got location turned on, it'll even put the GPS coordinates on the image, and that's all metadata. So information about the information. Um, so one of the things that is really useful about looking at, images of information is when something is anomalous, it doesn't fit the normal data set. It's really easy to spot in a visual. You might not see it if it's written out as a number, for example. So you can see how things correlate. You can see things that are outliers, all that stuff. All right, so they start talking about a case study here, and we're not going to dig super deep into this, but you are free to do it on your own, by the way. But what they're doing here is this process of doing the exploration, right? It says here basically that we want to make sure that we're looking at the right data in the right format, in the right context. We want data that's pertinent to what we're doing. We don't want information about something completely different when we're looking at one particular thing. We also want to look at our data because the people involved in it will say, well, hey, this is the important piece of information. I'm not even including that, right? That type of thing. But the visual, once again, might show us things that we might not see otherwise. So the example that they're giving here is one that's based on e-commerce, right? We're basically, and this is very common in the e-commerce world. When we have customers that do all their interactions online, we have all this data that goes with it, and it's really powerful, right? Like if you're a company selling stuff, so being able to look at the data output of your process will help you do a whole bunch of stuff. So for example, we have a data set here. It says contains transactional data from customers in various countries who make purchases from a UK-based online retail company that sells gifts for various occasions, right? And we can look at the data set. So for example, we have information about all of these different things, what products we're selling, the company, the customers, and transactions that take place in a certain time range, right? And if we start to look at the data, right, and if you guys are wondering here, where is the data set that goes with this? I'm wondering too. So, but notice that we have some links here that you can follow to pull it in. But let's just take a really quick example. Once again, high level view. When we start looking at the information that's presented in this scenario, we look at like things that are purchased. We look at stock levels, what something costs, how much they bought, is there a description, all of the stuff that you see listed here, like what data is pertinent for us to basically deal with it. Now, one thing that does happen with data quite a bit is when we're looking at it, sometimes you don't have all the data, or sometimes certain data is omitted for whatever reason. Maybe the sale didn't go through, or maybe the information is incomplete. So there's always this process of not only looking at it to understand it, but also looking at it to clean the data. In other words, to remove the anomalies. So here's a weird little example that they're giving, right? So they're showing this company, mind you, that is from the UK, the United Kingdom, that's selling stuff. Well, they sell stuff to the UK, but they also sell to the rest of the world. But the ask that they're looking at is not, I want to know the information about all the people buying stuff here in the UK. I want to know about the people who are outside the UK buying stuff. So if I'm looking at the data set, the UK numbers are so strong that it skews all the rest so that they look like they're almost nothing or of no significance. So one thing that we can do is you can actually get rid of that piece of information, and then all the rest of the information then scales on a different level. Now I can look at that other stuff more meaningfully, where if I look at the previous slide, it's like none of this stuff down here looks like it's nothing. Right. But if you get rid of the UK, which is skewing all the data, now it's a lot more apparent what the values are for the smaller things. So one thing that you can do is you can adjust your data this way, right? So it's like if I'm focusing on outside of country sales, well, then I should eliminate the local sales, right? Makes sense, right? And then things will be correctly scaled, so they can look at this and figure out who their top 5 countries are for sales. All right. All right. But now if you start breaking it down again, it says, okay, so just knowing, who's buying what, it doesn't really necessarily give us any value, right? So it says just knowing the sales doesn't help us. There might be more sales of less valued products in some countries. Doesn't mean that the company shouldn't allocate resources. So you shouldn't like close the store because you think you're not selling anything, right? It's maybe you're not looking at the right information. It might also be helpful to know, it says which country purchases the most valued product in the list, right? So the top 3 countries with the most spends, meaning over, a certain amount of dollars, are these. So even though that doesn't necessarily match up with the other list, it still doesn't mean it's not valuable. So basically, what they're doing with the data set is, they're trying to figure out, okay, the highest number of orders come from the UK, Germany is second, and then the customer with the highest money spent on purchases comes from the UK. The second position goes to the Netherlands. So even though Germany had more sales, people are buying bigger ticket items in the Netherlands, and maybe those create more profit. So why would you want to lose that? You know what I mean? And maybe that's more the pertinent piece of information. So these are the analyses, and I think we've talked about this. All right, so like you start looking at data, and one way that you look at data often these days are in the format of what we call a data dashboard. And they have a little picture of it here, right? And so you have multiple pieces of information, sometimes plotted on the same chart. There's bar charts and line graphs that we're seeing here. There's a lot of annotation. So there's a lot of like legends. There's the axes are marked. Everything is labeled. Things are color coded. There's little pop-up boxes. Arguably very beautiful, right? We call this type of dashboard typically a business intelligence display or tool, right? And by the way, data people, before we called things data analytics, we used to call it business analytics or operations science, by the way. So when you hear those terms, the reason I kind of bring those up is when you guys go out and look for work, those are categories in which you can look, because a lot of business analysts are basically data people or AI people, or, for example, they're all using the same tools. Right. So this is kind of the kind of thing that, we're used to looking at. And why do we look at it like this? Because this is supposedly meaningful. We can deliver a lot of information about a lot of data in a very quick, efficient way, often displaying many visualizations together. But this is what we call a dashboard. And a tool like Tableau, which we're about to learn, is one of the preeminent tools for creating dashboards. And this is actually a view from Tableau, right? This is a dashboard from, I think, Tableau public website that you can see. And what it's giving us is a summary of a lot of information. Notice all the little tiles in there. So it's really kind of a collection of visualizations providing a lot of information. You know what made data dashboards explode? It's not like they're brand new, but man, when that pandemic hit, I mean, holy cow, people were looking at this stuff every day. Like, how many people died today? Am I going to die next? And yeah, it was kind of crazy, but it summarizes a lot of information in one concise place, and all the data that it takes to get to the point to drive this visualization is what Tableau is all about. It's not that I couldn't do some of this work in a product, for example, like Excel, right? And so those of you in the data analytics classes, the data analytics 1 and 2, right? You learn how to create charts and graphs in Excel, and are like, well, this is kind of like Excel, right? That'll be your first reaction, I guarantee it. True, but at the same time, this gives us a different way. It doesn't pollute our data. It allows us to connect data from different sources together, and it has really super powerful visualization tools that far exceed the capabilities in the standard spreadsheet program. And you'll see that it's also a whole lot easier than coding in Python to create the same kind of visualizations. And then you have so much more control over it, right? And so you can take the data, feed it into Tableau, create these dashboards, and publish it on the web without really knowing a whole lot, right? And this is the kind of capability that a lot of companies are looking for. And a lot of people, by the way, do not have either the skills or the knowing to even how to approach this, right? And this is one of those killer areas of opportunity, I think. So, all right. So the importance of dashboards, right? So I'm going to rifle through these pretty quickly, right? So we can combine data from a lot of different sources and share it all in one spot, right? And people look at this stuff, and managers in particular, right? They trust our data scientists to put this stuff together and go, oh, look, sales are up. This is great. Let's grow, that kind of thing. And, if a manager's looking at this and using it to make a decision, I mean, these dashboards are driving a company. So you could be working in a kind of a lowly position at a company, but if you're putting the data dashboards together, you're kind of steering the ship, folks, or helping to steer the ship, right? And it's all in how the data is presented. Because some of this data can be tied to live data feeds, data dashboards can update dynamically. So if I had new numbers for how many people died from COVID, or how much money we made, or how many sales we sent out, that can immediately be reflected on the dashboard live as more data is added. That's powerful too, right? When you have current up-to-date data and it's represented in metrics that's easy to understand, see, and read and all that, it certainly will create more effectivity. And you know what? In the long run, it's just so powerful, this capability. Yes, you can do it with code, but using a no-code tool like Tableau, you'll see why people use this tool. I also want you to keep firmly in your mind that this is tightly interrelated with Excel pivot tables and Power BI, which is the extension from Excel that Microsoft wants you to use. And if you're in our program, Power BI is usually covered pretty heavily in data analytics too, in the business intelligence class, right? So you get a little bit of Tableau, you get a little bit of Power BI, both very employable skills, by the way. Right. Different types of data analysis, right? So here's one, and this is a whole lot of terminology here, but we have what we call univariate analysis. And this is what we call, they call it the simplest form, right? So the data being analyzed consists of just one variable, right? It doesn't relate to anything, so for example, how much money did you make last year? Is one variable, right? Summarized in one number, right? There you go, right? All right. Usually the main purpose of this is describe the data and find patterns that exist within it. Okay. So types of univariate graphs, right? So we can do this in a number of different ways. Some really common ones used with this kind of data are what we call stem and leaf plots, and we'll look at what all those are. There's histograms and box plots, and what you're seeing right now here is what kind of a plot on the screen. What kind of, is that a histogram?
Is it the whisker and box plot?
All right. It is a box plot, and here's kind of the giveaway, because it depicts a bunch of different things, right? So we have the max and min values, the 25% quartile, the 50 and the 75% are in the box. The median is shown, and the standard deviation by the size of the box. All that stuff is shown inside the graphic, which is a lot of data. So we're looking at a lot of single data points in that last one. There's also multivariate analysis, where we're looking at the relationship of more than one data set. So we have, for example, maybe a data set for sales and a data set for weather. For example, do sales go up if it's a rainy day? Right? Everybody's sitting inside on their computer on a hot summer day and it's raining. Okay, so they can't be outside, so they're on the computer shopping. Look, it was raining, so we got more sales, right? So you can like do that kind of stuff. Sometimes we overlay it, so like we'll like use like line charts and color lines a different color, or we use bar charts and those will be different, and sometimes they overlap a little bit. But plotting basically more than one piece of information on the same chart. We can do all forms of these. There's a whole bunch of different selections inside of tools like Tableau. We can do scatter plots, multivariate charts, a run chart, which is a line graph over time, and then a heat map. That's kind of a popular one these days where we can see how important something is by the color that it is, like maybe in a grid pattern or something. Yeah, you can visualize data without coding. So we did all this Python stuff, right? And we created a bunch of graphs, and I know most of us didn't even understand what we were doing, but it's possible, right? For sure, right? However, there are some of these products, and we talked about Tableau, which is the one that we're going to try today. And then there's also Power BI. That's Microsoft's product, really attempting to compete with Tableau. The one advantage of using Power BI and why a lot of companies that are using it now is because if you have a Microsoft Office subscription on an enterprise level, this is not on a consumer level, but on the enterprise level, Power BI is included in the bundle. So it's free. And what you guys will see is Power BI and Tableau is kind of a lot like working with pivot tables in Excel. If you guys remember that process and how like some things you could put in rows and some things in columns and you can move around the boxes, and it's similar to that. There's also this click view program. I've never tried it, but it is a pretty prominent one in the field as well. Tableau is a really important product in this space. I would argue it's probably a lot more important than Power BI. From a data science standpoint, like any data science person worth their weight knows this product and probably uses this as their primary visualization tool. You can see all the features that they have up on the screen here. It is by a company called Salesforce, and there are several different versions of the product, which we'll talk about. We're going to be using Tableau Desktop. And this is the full product that gives you a lot more power. Does require a license, but I am providing you a license key. If you didn't have this option, you can use the public version, but it only lets you work with very, very few data types. Like I think maybe just CSV files and Excel files or something like that, where the full product gives you way more options, including live database tie-in. The public version is free though. So like if you ever revert to that version, it's okay. You can still do work. It's just simpler set of tools, but you can still publish your output. So it's still a useful tool, by the way, even if you don't have a license. All right. So I did put this into the slides and I added this morning because keep in mind, I didn't know that I had a license key until I looked at my email this morning, but it was there when I got there. And it was really more around midday, whatever. So if you follow these instructions, already installed Tableau Public, it might be as simple as just changing your license key and then you have the full product, by the way. If not, then it'll be a separate install. I'm not really sure what that is. When we do this installation, it really is going to be a collection of two products, right? There's the Tableau desktop software. That's the primary product. And Tableau also has a data pre-processing product called Tableau Prep Builder. So that's when you're working with data that needs cleaning or data that comes from different sources and doesn't really match up well together. Sometimes you use that product to prepare. The comparison I use for the Prep Builder is, if you guys remember, when working in Excel, we could like import, like just open a CSV file, right, in the data analytics class, or we could go through the Excel Power Query Editor or something like that. That's like the Prep Builder. It's like a cleaning and transforming step before you bring it into Excel. Prep Builder is the same tool for Tableau Desktop. Do you have to use it? No, you don't. But if you have messy data or data that needs a lot of work, then you use the Prep Builder typically to do that. Now, there are a series of steps here in the PowerPoint, but what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to veer away from the PowerPoint, take us back to our core shell, and I want to show you the information that I embedded here. First is just an overview of what it is, what it looks like when it's running. There's a link here if you want to read up on it, whatever. But I do have install instructions that I've shared right here. Now, I will let you know that you're all using the same license key. This is how Salesforce arranges this. So all of you will use this license key, but it has a limited number of usages. I want you to listen to this very carefully. And you know what? I'm really being to continue. All right. So the first step is to get you guys over to the Tableau website. And one of the things that you want to do is you want to set up an account. I did share in the course shell here, and I'm putting this on a different screen. You guys can pull it right from the listing, but you can go here to create a Tableau account first. Before you download, they want you to like sign up and register. And since they're giving us a license for free, I think we can be nice enough to do that for them, right? It's kind of like give them a little info and they potentially have another customer, especially if you guys go out and work in the field, you probably will use this product professionally and eventually will be a customer, would be the thinking. So give them your last name, first name, use your student email account with the .edu address. If you don't, then the license key won't work, by the way. Okay. Set up a password for yourself and create your account. Once the account is created, we will go to the download page, which I thought I had open in my browser. Yeah, I think I do. All right, so I'm going to assume that you guys are doing that process or proceeding. And I wanted to make sure that we were downloading exactly the correct version of this. And I might bring, okay, so I'm bringing the Brightspace page back over, but I have a direct download link right below those install instructions. So if you click this link, it will take you here. And the reason I did it like this is because I wanted to make sure you were grabbing the right version, because there is, and I just want to point this out, there's a server version, a cloud version, a public version, and the desktop version. And desktop is what we want. And I thought it was way too easy to make the wrong selection. So here is the direct link to download, which I am now placing in our chat, if I can even find it on my screen. There it is. All right, so there's the link in the chat. I do want to make a special note. This works on Mac and PC. PC is the preferred platform. On the Mac, there's a couple little things you have to do, but notice on the Mac that they have both an Intel version, so you have to know what kind of CPU you have. So you have an older Mac, it's probably an Intel machine. If it's a newer Mac that has like an M1, M2, M3, M4, or whatever, that's called Apple Silicon. So you want to use a different version. They compile differently because they have a different processor. From what I understand, the Mac version has a couple nuances of other things you have to install to make it work. It doesn't seem that daunting, and there's plenty of support to do it. So it shouldn't be a problem for Mac people, but I'm just letting you know that. Once again, if you do have the public version already installed, you should be able to change your license key to the other version pretty easily from what I understand. All right. Once you have that downloaded, you want to run the installer. And that is not something I'm going to demonstrate here in class. It's a pretty self-explanatory process. You download the exe file and it guides you through the installation. It's basically a whole bunch of next, finished, I agree kind of stuff, right? And then the next thing you know, the product will launch. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the assumption that you guys are succeeding at that process. In fact, while I'm jabbering away, you might already be done with the download and doing the install already. It does not take that long. And then what I want to do is I want to kind of get back the slideshow here. Let's see if I can find it. Right. So we did all this. So you'll these are their instructions, which we're not doing. I'm just rifling through the slides really quick. You create a profile, tells you how to do the install with little arrows and everything. And then when you're all done, you get a screen that sort of looks like this. Right? This is what Tableau looks like when you start up. And I'm going to rifle through a couple of these, and then we're going to go through these steps that are on the screen right now. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to come out of presentation mode of my PowerPoint, and I'm just going into like what I call my notes mode here on my other screen, and I'm just going to run Tableau. We have about 10 minutes, so this will kind of be a precursor. So part of your assignment, by the way, this week, I don't want to show that license key, is basically to complete these tasks. So one is to install Tableau, right? To use the license that we have above. Download the dependency files, which I've already done here. There's a CSV up above. And then we'll look at the data in Tableau, and then we'll create a basic pie chart, and that's the assignment, right? And this is just to get our feet wet. This is not, no heavy lifting is happening here. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and first launch Tableau. So I'm going to go to my start menu here, and I was running it earlier, and you notice I have two versions on here. Today I added the 2025 version. I understand that you can have multiple versions on your machine at the same time. I think I'm probably going to uninstall the old version, real frankly, right? I didn't want to do that today, though. I just kind of ran out of time. So I am launching Tableau right now. And it's coming up on the screen. And where you begin basically is with this screen where, you know, they're assuming, hey, you're going to analyze some data. So let's connect up. Let's either connect me to a database or give me a data file of some sort. And what I do want to show you here, and I'm going to go full screen on this, is that once the product is up and running, and this is kind of like your entry point into the product, I want you to notice all the different things that you can connect to. Probably the favorite file format for this product is Microsoft Excel. So Microsoft Excel, in terms of having, you know, the tabular data format that we all know and love. So like one spreadsheet that has multiple tabs, for example, has a lot of powerful features. Excel is still the preeminent database, right? And that's why you don't see like other spreadsheet programs even listed here. We also very often will work with text files. Like, for example, they'll either be TXT or CSV files. Those are text files. And JSON files, which are key value pair files, right? JavaScript object notation. You can pull from Microsoft Access databases, and more and more and more and more. You can also live connect to a database. So if you know how to log into a database, you have that kind of capability, you can tie directly into it. That's really crazy powerful too. The neat thing about all of these, especially with the more dynamic file formats like Microsoft Excel or a database, if the data and the data source changes, it will live propagate into your dashboards and visualizations and into your feed here if you so wish, right? And that's considered the default, right? Because if you're tying into a data source and the data updated tonight, tomorrow you're looking at fresh stuff in your dashboard. So that's why that's kind of preferred. Now I already have our CSV file downloaded, and I'm just trying to remember even what the name of it was. So I'm just going to go to my downloads folder here and take a look. And I think it's this one, the data set of employee attrition, right? I think is the correct one. And that's already in my downloads folder, so I'm all good. So I'm going to go find that file. That is technically a text file. And if you're not comfortable clicking text file when it's a CSV, you can go to the more thing here, right? And then you can look for whatever you need, and you can even pick the format, but you can see all the different types of stuff that it opens. But if we just look for CSV, there's my CSV file, and I'm going to click open. All right, so now it's loading up the data from this file. And you know what? I did cardinal sin. And after all this talking about it, right? If I'm looking at a data file, what's my recommendation for a data file? Open it and look at the data, right? I always say that. It's like, see what's in there. Well, there's no harm done by just looking at it. So I'm going to double click it and let it open up in Excel. Of course, Excel's going to screen number 2, but I am okay. And for some reason, Excel is having this weird issue. I have to open stuff from inside. All right, so I have that data set right there. There it is. All right, so here's the data set. And you'll notice that it looks like it's got a bunch of different columns here. And if I just kind of resize them, I can see that this must be, okay, so this is just the header row. So the first row of data is not really data, right? It's just a header. And then it's got employee ID, gender, age, education, blah, 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 blah. It's like demographics. And then they got a bunch of columns here, like variable 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever those are. I have no idea what they are, right? But there's something, right? That's we don't know, right? But we're taking a look at it. But some of this stuff is pretty clear. I think like gender, age, education, relationship, hometown, unit, decision skill, possess, whatever that means, time of service. There's some data here that we can work with. But now I'm familiar, with what it is. And ideally, what I would do is I would also scroll through it and make sure none of it's broken, that kind of thing, before I go analyzing it. Because like right off the bat, I'm looking here and I'm going, oh, whoever this person is decided not to report their age for some reason. That would be bad data, by the way. Right. Okay. Anyhow, let's go ahead and close that. I'm not going to save it. Right. But that same spreadsheet now is loaded up inside of Tableau and it looks different. Right. The point of this interface is that I can pull in data from one data source and then I can open up another file from a different data source and open that up in here as well and look at it. So you notice that I'm getting a preview of the data. So first I have a little listing of all the columns here and what type of column it is. Is it text? Is it a number? Whatever. And so this is kind of like, if you want to make a database comparison, this is kind of like our schema table that's showing us the columns and the data types, right? And then over here is the actual data. It automatically, and I think this is pretty cool, recognize that the first row was information and didn't include it in the data set. It did that automatically, right? Whereas if I was looking at this inside of Python, I would have to write code to omit the first line, that kind of thing. Here it's just automatically, but I can look at the data and do I still have that one? Yeah, I got that one person that didn't report their age, right? So bad data, whatever, but it's listed as null. There's no data there, but I can look at all the data right here. If I had a different data file that related to this, I could also pull that in and then start to connect them. So I could, for example, if I had an Excel spreadsheet that had multiple tabs, I can connect all the tabs. Or if I have different spreadsheets, or if I have a database table and an Excel spreadsheet and a CSV file, all with related information, I can connect them together. And they have all these little drag and drop connection tools that you can add, by the way, right? And very database like I can do inner joins, left joins, right joins, unions. I can do all that stuff inside this interface too. So it's kind of like almost like a database product in a way, sort of, right? On top of it all. All right. All right. So that's part of where you start to do that. So you get your data all connected up and then you start to look at things. And I want you to notice down here, there's a few tabs that we have right down here at the bottom that are kind of important. Right now, we're on the data source tab. We're looking at the source of the information. And this is, real frankly, one of the more powerful parts of Tableau is often you see a visualization like, oh, I see the data that made this. All right, yeah, that does it. So here's my data source for whatever else I create from it. It's attached. That's one of the powers of Tableau. All right. So if we want to go now to the sheet, this is what we call our worksheet. And what the worksheet is a different way to access that data and do stuff with it. Okay. And typically, what we'll have here listed, and this is kind of an oddball listing because it comes from a CSV file, is we have a combination of like, looks like text fields. You see the little ABC in front of them, and then a bunch of number fields, right? And the number fields usually we consider measures because they're numeric. And then the other ones, for example, like gender, there's no numeric value for that. It's one or the other or whatever, whatever categories we have now. I mean, generally we have two settings for that, but maybe we should have three or five or something. I'm not really sure, but it's not numeric, right? There's like an M or an F or a other maybe, right? Whereas if I looked at age, that's numeric. If I looked at like my pay scale, that's numeric, right? And those can be measured as numbers. But it doesn't mean that this information is not important, right? It's just a different type of information, but it can still be analyzed, right? So useful and an important piece. All right. So exploring all that, the power of Tableau ultimately comes down to what you do with the information, right? And I want you to notice here up at the very top of the screen, we have these row and column boxes. And believe it or not, I know we're over time, so I'm letting you guys know this. I am going to record through to get to the point where I'm creating the pie chart. So if you want to hang out, hang out. If you have to go, you can go. But I'm going to roll until I'm done, and it's not much more, by the way. Okay, so if you remember back to using pivot tables in Excel, right? If you've had that class with us, remember the row and column settings, and we have all these data points. And what we're going to do now is we're going to take a piece of information. We're just going to focus on one, and we're going to just stick with gender. And we're going to take the gender thing, and notice as I click on it, it turns into a capsule, right? Like this colored thing. I can click and drag it, and I'm going to pull it up to the columns indicator. And as I pull it up there, it's creating kind of, a piece of information here, right? I'm also going to take that same piece of information and move it to the rows area. All right, that's kind of weird a little bit, right? I don't know how that's useful. But now we're going to do this other thing. And this is, where some of the power of this product lies, is like what to put in rows, what to put in columns. Sometimes you fumble around and you mess with it a lot until you get to where you're at. What we want to do with the one up in the columns area is when I hit the little drop down, go down to measure. And because this is not really a numeric value, we are going to count how many males and how many females we have. So we're going to measure it by counting. So we're going to switch that to count. And then notice it automatically created a bar chart. What did I do? Nothing, right? I just made a selection on the screen and it created a bar chart. All right. The other thing that might pop up for you guys as you're doing this, right, is the fact that there's this little show me panel. And sometimes when you're doing visualizations, this just pops up, right? And right now it's on bar chart, but ultimately what we want for this assignment is pie chart, right? So we're going to click on pie chart, and there it is. So it took that same information and created a pie chart with that same data. And I want you to notice what it did with the little capsules is it moved them into this marks area, and then I can tweak it from here even further. But there's all these like weird icons. So for example, this one stands for colors we're working with. This one stands for the angle, obviously, of the pie chart. This one stands for the size. And you know what? This size isn't great, by the way. That's a really small pie chart. And the other thing is, it doesn't really say anything, right? There's no words on it or anything like that. So why don't we do one thing first is we'll come up to this drop down at the top here, and I'm going to hit entire view. And now we have a big pie chart. What you might not have noticed in the interim is as it made this pie chart, it also automatically made a legend. So blue is for female M is for male. Now, right away, we can tell there's more females at this company than males, right? So there's a little bit of gender disparity. Maybe that's normal for whatever this company does. Who knows, right? It also tells us over here that we ran a count measure on gender, and that count is 3,000 records that we're analyzing. You'll also notice here as I hover over the parts of the pie chart that as I hover, it gives me the information. It's like reading the data underneath and giving me an output. And folks, I've barely done anything here. This is really kind of the grand takeaway. You'll also notice that there's a label, right? We can change that label. So if I wanted to say a certain thing, but otherwise, ultimately, it's taking it from the sheet name automatically. So I could, for example, rename the sheet and call it, I don't know, gender ratio or something like that, right? And then now that visualization is automatically entitled that. Now, there's a lot more nuances to this, but if you can load up Tableau, get it to run, get the license key in there, load up your data, pull the data capsules into this thing, switch over to this other visualization, screenshot that whole process, that's your assignment for the week, right? What we will do with this, and what I would implore you to do as a process of exploration, and I hope you guys are okay with that, is I shared a link here somewhere. Pausing the all right, I created a link here to this LinkedIn learning video. They had some excellent Tableau videos in the past, and this one I think maybe a week or two old. They just posted it, right? And this does a great job of explaining what Tableau is, how to work with it. I would recommend watching the first two sections. And if you want, just dig in deep and go all the way through it. What's really neat about this particular LinkedIn learning course is this one has one where there's quizzes for each section. And if you pass all the quizzes at the end, they give you a certificate, and you can put a little Tableau badge on your LinkedIn profile, by the way. Right. So I would encourage you to do this. We only have so much time to cover this stuff in class, but we're just getting our feet wet on a very minimal level here tonight. All right. That's kind of the goal for tonight. So complete the assignment, get it installed, load the data, visualize it, play with it a little bit. If you want to experiment, there's lots of great data sets out there. You can use the sample files from this video and play with it to your heart's content. And the stuff you can do with this is crazy powerful, and it's all drag and drop, every little aspect of it, pretty much. Okay, so that's the lay of the land for this week. So make sure that you get that stuff done. I'm going to call this video done right